Oh, how did you get into financial services?
Left school, I failed miserably. I was shit at everything. I got 1 O level, and I wanted more than anything else to be a ski instructor.
Yeah.
So I became a ski instructor. I did that for a little while. My mum was running a recruitment consultancy at the time. She said, you got to get a proper job. And so she got me 3 job interviews. One was in Bishop Stortford at a BMW dealership called Sewell's. One was as a trainee estate agent, and the other one was a trainee photocopier salesman. So I went to the BMW dealership because it came with a 3 Series, 316 and whatever it was. And at the time it was like, that's amazing. I didn't care about the salary, I cared about the car. And I got that job. I was there for a month and got fired for having a bad attitude. And then I think my dad wanted me to join the estate agency, but because he did, I didn't want to. So I went to London and I learned to sell photocopiers. And that was, without doubt, the best experience of my life. The memories I have from that, you know, the training, we used to train. In that house where I lived next door to you, I would wake up at 4:30 every day. I would shower, I'd leave at 5. I'd be in London for 6 because training started at 6:15 until 8. Yeah. And if you weren't in at 6:15, they'd lock the doors. And so we trained 6:15 till 8 in the morning in the office. And at 8 o'clock, I was just south of the Tower Bridge. And at 8 o'clock, I had to drive across to my patch, which was EC3. And I had to do 100 door knocks. And then in the afternoon, I had to do 100 cold calls. And that's what it was, because we didn't have phones or computers and stuff. We had the yellow pages, but that's all we had. So I did that. And some of the really valuable lessons that I learned, my boss on day one said to me after I'd gone out door knocking, he said, look, you're going to get on the phone right now. He goes, and I want to tell you before you make these phone calls that nearly everybody, in fact 99 out of 100, are either going to say not interested or they're going to say something much worse. He said, so what I want you to understand is you need to go and get all these no's and this rejection, because there's somebody in there that's going to say yes. And all I want you to worry about is that one person. So go find 99 no's for me now. Yeah. And so my mind at that time, as being I was 19 years old, my mind was like, oh, okay, I've got to find no's. So I've got my telephone script in front of me. I've got my sheet of objections here, how you handle objections listed. So I've got these 2 things in front of me. I've got 2 card boxes on my desk, a phone that's got a wire to the floor. And I start picking up the phone and dialing, and it's like F off and B off and all this kind of stuff. No, why are you calling me? Stop calling, all this kind of stuff. And then one person, who I'll never forget, one person's answered the phone and she said, actually, we're getting quotes right now. And I was like, can I come and see you? She's like, well, we just want a quote. I'm like, well, I can't quote you until I come and see you. Look, I could be there in half an hour. And so she said, yes, sure. So I gave the lead across to my sales guy I worked for then, David Thornton. And David went out, saw her, and he sold her a fax machine that it was plain paper faxes. They first come out by Ricoh. And he sold her this plain paper fax machine for £5,000. And there was like £1,500 profit in it. And so then what my boss did the next day at training is he took all of the compliment slips and he laid them out on the boardroom table. And he divided the compliment slips by the amount of commission was in the deal. And there were the pieces of paper. He said, that's how much that piece of paper's worth. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh man, look at this. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. But of 16 trainees, I was the only one left standing after a year. Because they'd all given up, they couldn't deal with the rejection, they couldn't cope with it, which sales gives you. But for me, rejection was a good thing, because I don't know why, but it went in my head and it sat there and I'm like, I've got to find the no's. So every day, whether it was knocking on the doors or whether it was making the cold calls, it was like, I've got to find some no's. And most people can't cope with rejection, so they don't get very far. So that was the kind of beginning of my journey. And then I went from the company that trained me, I had to leave because the boss gave me his car at Christmas and I got done for speeding on the M11 and I lost my license for 3 months and I couldn't get into London. You know where we lived, we weren't near a train station or a bus station or anything, so I couldn't get into London. And so I took a job with a copier company that was out in Braintree near where we were. And the guy said, look, I'll give you someone to pick you up from work and take you to your meetings and stuff. I was like, okay, solved. And I did that for 3 or 4 months. And then I went back into London with another company where I'd felt most comfortable. And again, things were great. I had a couple of years and it was good. We earned great money. There was people earning lots of money in selling copiers, like lots of money. So I felt I was in the right environment, highly competitive, hundreds of salespeople, everyone like going for broke, mercenary people and caring people, all these different personality types. And then somebody I knew had been interviewed for a job selling financial advice in Hong Kong. And I was like, And then someone had told me there was like even bigger money. And I remember there was a guy called Seamus that worked with us, and he said to me, the only way you'll ever make big money is to work with money. And I was like, oh, and it was one of those moments. I was like, oh, that's so profound. But when you're a kid, it's like, oh, yeah. And so you then go off then, and I need to search for a way to do that. And I then went for an interview, and then the head office of the company was in Ipswich. So I drove up to Ipswich, and I went for the interview, and I was 23 at the time, and the woman's name was Bryony, I'll never forget. She interviewed me, and then when I got home, I got a phone call, and she said, no, you're too young. And so I sat down with my mum, and I was like, Mum, they said I'm too young. She's like, okay. She said, so what are you going to do about it? I'm like, well, they said I need to be 25. She said, okay, well then either wait 2 years or do something about it. And I'm like, well, what would you do about it? And she just looked at me and she said, do I have to tell you? And I was like, tell me, Mum. And so she told me what to do, and I followed her instructions. So the next day I drove back to the office, and I waited for the CEO of the company for 4 hours. And eventually he came, and he's like, what's wrong? What are you sat here for? And I'm like, I just want a chance. She won't give me a chance. I think I can do this. I want a chance. And everything turned on its head in a second, because my grandfather had just had a stroke, and he was in hospital in Chelmsford, at Gallywood. The guy I was interviewing, so my grandfather was in hospital in Gallywood. Yeah. The guy that was interviewing me that owned the company, his father, that very day, was in the same hospital as my grandfather.
No.
And he drove with me to the hospital, and we literally, he went one way, I went another way. And when that came out in the conversation, he said, I think it was a Thursday, he said, you got 5 days to be in Hong Kong. And I was, 5 days? And this was back before, you couldn't book a flight online. You had to go to a travel agent, where are you going to get the money from, and all this kind of stuff. And then things changed. I booked a flight to Hong Kong, and things changed. I actually went to Bangkok. I was trained in Bangkok, and I remember walking around the streets of Bangkok the weekend I arrived there. I thinking, what have I done? All my mates were back home, you know, my family was back home. I'm on the other side of the world. What have I done? What have I done? After I got through those couple of days, I phoned my mum up. I'm like, Mum, I can't do this. I want to come home. She's like, you're not coming home. She's just, this is not happening. You've been there like 2 days. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to be here. She's like, you agreed. You've gone to work for them. You give them 3 months of your best shot. If after 3 months doesn't work, then you come home. By after 3 months, it was amazing. You know, I learned. I remember going on my financial services training course, and I remember I sat on a course, and there were these products like regular savings products and life insurance and term and whole of life products. And I'm sitting there, and I'm on this course going, what do you mean people have to pay to save their money? What's this 1.5% a year? What's that about? Well, they have to pay one. Well, why would anyone do that? And I remember I got to Bangkok, and I said, don't get why people have to pay to save money. And it took me probably another 10 days for it to kind of like fall into my brain in a way that I could understand it. But honestly, I sat there, I was on a course for a week going, why would anyone do that? You know, why used to leave it in the bank? You know, why would you pay it? It was me being taught to understand that the bank are using it to invest themselves. But again, you're 23 years old, you're green, you don't know stuff. Yep. And when you don't know stuff, you know, you also, when you're young, you're not always brave enough to ask the dumb questions. Yep. And so
you don't have to be young for that.
Yeah. And so yeah, that happened, and then I lived in 10 countries. So I worked for one company, set my own company up, and my dad was in West Africa in Nigeria. I went there, and I'm like, right, and people were paid a shitload of money to be there. And so people had massive disposable incomes. It was great from a business point of view, impossible to recruit for though, because nobody wanted to go to Nigeria. But, you know, I'd never seen people with as much disposable income as they were there. I mean, everything was paid for, and everything they earned went in the bank accounts for whatever they wanted it. And I was also lonely because I couldn't recruit people, and I'm not sure I was a good enough leader at that time. And then I went for an interview in London, and I didn't know where I wanted to live. And we got the map of the world out on the desk. And the guy that was interviewing me wanted me to go back to the Far East. He's like, no, you need Singapore. I was like, I want to see other parts of the world. And we just agreed for no reason, and we just pointed at Sao Paulo in Brazil. And so I went to Sao Paulo in Brazil. And there wasn't any plan behind it. It was like, there's business. And I think I've been sold on the fact that there's business everywhere. So I went to Sao Paulo, and then that company I worked for was called Britex, and 5 directors of Britex then became one. and then the senior management in Britex, which was 3 of us, then became one with the CEO of Britex, and it was changed to De Vere. So then we founded this company, and there was 25 of us. We then grew it through 70 countries to 1,700 people. So it had grown, but because I was a workaholic and I liked to travel, I could go and work 3 or 4 years in one country and then go and open up an office somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I went from Brazil, I then went to Cairo, I then went to Milan, then to Slovakia, then to Amsterdam, and had 4 years in Amsterdam where I would come back here every weekend. And then after Amsterdam, I then went to Dubai 15 years ago. And again, I got to Dubai. I remember moving into Dubai. We bought a company there. I walked in the offices and it was like, I couldn't believe it. There was this 3,000 square foot of small cubbyhole offices, like where people have little offices with doors. I'm like, what? There were 12 employees of this company. I got to the end of the first week, I'd sacked 10 of them. And I'm like, I've got the interior people in. I was like, get rid of all these walls. Let's open this space up. And so we opened it all up, painted it white, and then we got busy recruiting. And so we had, by the end of that year, I think we had 90 people. Then the second year, we had 160 people just in the office in Dubai. And then we grew Abu Dhabi and other places in the Middle East. And it was just a great time. It really was. And then 2012, I sold my shares and I stepped out of that business and went in a different direction. Never to go into financial services again. Only to 12 months later, set up another wealth management company.
I think it always pulls you back. The amount of people that I've spoken to from the mortgage industry and everything, they can't get out. It's like they go and do something else for a period of time, and it's like that pull is always there, and you end up going back into it in some way, shape or form.